lot of people who come on my sailboats in the summer are there for the first time. They've never been on a sailboat. Some of them have never been on a boat before. And just watching people's faces kind of like relax when we turn the engine off and it's just the sails and it's quiet and it's peaceful and it's beautiful. And just like seeing people experience that for the first time is pretty powerful.
Welcome to the Passages from the Heart podcast, a podcast made by an everyday sailor for everyday sailors. We talk everything from day sailing to racing to cruising to camping out on your boat and everything in between. It's time now to raise the sails. Ahoy, sailors! I'm so excited to introduce you to one of my favorite captains, Captain Brandi, a captain I spent time sailing with on Lake Superior this past summer. Captain Brandi shares how she came to find her passion in sailing and why she decided to obtain her United States Coast Guard captain's license. Captain Brandi also reflects upon the challenges of being a young female captain, how lessons learned out on the water and from sailing keep her humble, and how she finds tremendous joy in helping others experience just how amazing sailing is.
Well, I'd love to welcome you to the podcast. I call it the Passages from the Heart podcast. I think I told you probably, I don't know, early on when we went sailing together this summer that I have a little sailing YouTube channel and I have a blog. And then I started this podcast. I guess it was almost a year ago because, during the off season, it's really kind of I get depressed about not being on the water. And so I thought this would be a good project to talk to other sailors and, still keep learning and growing as my own self as a sailor and just also meeting new people. And so I was really stoked when you said that you wanted to come on board, pardon the pun, to do the podcast. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, typically what I ask folks when they come on the show, the first question I love to kind of throw at you is if you could talk about how sailing came into your life. And I think some of the questions that I'll ask you will be ones that I sort of know the answer to because of the time we spent together this summer. But I may ask you questions that I already asked you then now so that other people will know. But yeah, I mean, if you could share your story, how you found sailing, and I would love to hear that.
Yeah. So I grew up in Nebraska on a little tiny lake just south of Omaha. And I spent most of my childhood on ski boats and pontoon boats. And when I was in high school, my family got a sunfish sailboat. And my dad taught me how to sail on our little lake. And I really enjoyed it. And we ended up going down to do some American Sailing Association classes down in the Bahamas. That's kind of like really what cemented my love for sailing. And I moved up to Wisconsin for college on the South Shore, Lake Superior, and kind of got involved with the sailing community up here. And when I was 22, I went on a sailing adventure with this group called Sea Change Expeditions. They sail around 1 to 2/3 of Lake Superior every May and do climate change education and lake education at local schools. And that experience kind of really cemented me in wanting to pursue a career on the water. And so I've been kind of doing that ever since and got my captain's license this spring and spent the summer captaining the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, which was amazing. Absolutely loved it. And yeah, just looking forward to just getting as much time on the water as I can.
That sounds real. So there were some things that I do remember that we talked about when we sailed together this summer. I do remember about you being from Nebraska and the sunfish. I was curious. So you said your dad taught you how to sail. So did he grow up sailing then himself, or how did he learn how to sail?
Yeah. So he grew up, so the house I grew up in used to be my dad's family cabin. And then my dad rebuilt it a little bit when him and my mom got married. But so my grandpa and my grandpa's brother are or were pretty big sailors. And so my grandpa had polio, but he would, anytime there was like a big storm in Nebraska, the winds would pick up really big and he'd be like, all right, let's go sailing. And they'd all like go, and they had a couple of them, little sunfish boats. And so my dad learned from my grandpa. And I'm not sure how he got into it, but
Wow, that's really cool. I have a similar, I mean, I grew up sailing because my dad grew up sailing. So, and I don't know beyond, I
mhm.
don't know if his father's father or how that works. So I know there's a lot of people that I will meet that have similar stories to you and me about how sailing sort of entered their lives. It's kind of interesting because I don't know if you have siblings, but I have one sister, and it's weird. I really took to it as a little girl. I think I was 6. I think when we first started, and my sister is almost 4 years younger than me, so she was really just a little tyke when we would go. But she, never really kind of grew that affinity for being out in the water and sailing. She was always kind of
Mhm.
complaining, like, oh, I want to go back and be with my friends and the weekends and things like that. Whereas I was just like, I couldn't wait to get down to the lake and get on the boat and get out in the water and sail. So
Mhm.
do you have siblings, and do any of them, if you do, are they involved in any sort of water sports or sailing?
Yeah, I have two older sisters, and so they're much older than I am. So by the time we got that sailboat, they were already moved out of the family house. So I was the only one who really learned how to sail, and I was the only one of the three of us who went down to the Bahamas with my parents. Both my sisters enjoy being on the water, but they're not as into water sports as I am. Like we all grew up skiing and wakeboarding and stuff. But I'm the only one who really continues to do that stuff. They kind of like grew out of that. But yeah, they have other hobbies, but we all enjoy sitting on the pontoon as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. There's a lot of pontoons down at the lake where I sail, and I sometimes look and think, oh, that would be so nice because like you could just hop on and you don't have to worry about as
Yeah.
many things, right?
Yeah.
So
No
look,
lines to deal with.
yeah, exactly. No healing on the water. Some people don't like that. I don't mind it, but yeah, maybe one day. In fact, one of
Mhm.
my friends I grew up sailing with, I always give him a hard time. He now lives in the Minneapolis area, and he was totally into, like, he had his own mini fish, and then he got a laser when he was an older teenager, and I was always like super jealous of him. And then he got into Hobies, and so
Mm.
as a like a young man in college, and I think he went to school in Nebraska too, actually. But for college,
Oh.
he lived in Nebraska and went to college in Nebraska. But anyway, so he got really involved in that and did it for many years. And he told me the story about how he and his wife, well, I don't know if they were married then, but anyway, his partner, they were on the boat, and evidently somehow they, I don't know what happened specifically, but she ended up falling from the trapeze into the mast and like smashed her face or something. And so she just said,
Oh.
yeah, she just said to him, I'm never doing this again. So that was the end of
Wow.
the sailing. And he ended up getting oh no, they got a cruiser first and then they got a pontoon, and that's what they have now. So I always give him a hard time about it. But you know what? I can see, as long as people are getting out on the water, that's really, I think, all
Mhm.
that really matters. I'm curious. So the ASA stuff that you did. So you did do that
Mhm.
in collaboration with your parents, or were you by yourself when you did that?
I was with my parents, yeah, so we did, I think we were on, like a 38-foot, 40-foot catamaran in the Bahamas for, like, 7 days? 5
Yeah,
somewhere between 5 and 10 days, and I did, like, the ASA 101 and 103, I think? I can't quite
yeah,
remember, and
yeah,
then so I was only 16 at the time, so my parents did a couple more because they were qualified via age for those, but yeah, it was great. A very fun, privileged thing to do and as a 16-year-old, but it's, like, really what kind of started my love for sailing.
yeah. So being in the Caribbean, such a vast experience from in, I would say, from being a sailor on Lake Superior. So I know you mentioned also, going to school up in Wisconsin, and that's sort of
Mhm.
what, clicked you into the community, the sailing community up on Lake Superior. Do you ever think about how maybe you might enjoy doing some of what you did this summer on Lake Superior, being a captain and taking people out, and maybe doing that down in a warmer climate? Or what do you think on that?
Yes, I have thought about that quite a bit. The hard thing is I love snow, I love winter, but it's hard working seasonally up here. A lot of the jobs that are available, like the good jobs, aren't seasonal jobs up here. So it's hard to find a job that I would feel comfortable going to and then stopping in the spring to start sailing again. So actually after this I have an interview for a job in Maui as on a sail charter company. So I'll be doing like similar things I did this summer, taking people out on tours, snorkeling and whale watching tours and sunset stuff. Yeah, long-term goal, I'd love to get a job working on like a research or education vessel somewhere. And I'd be happy to do that in a warm climate. Yeah, I love Lake Superior. It's amazing, largest freshwater lake in the world, as you know, and but it is rather cold. So, and there's not a lot of life going on in the lake. So I love the idea of being somewhere where there's like reefs we can go snorkeling in, or seeing
Yeah.
dolphins off the bow and stuff would be pretty incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really interesting with how you've set yourself up to be in the marine industry. So you've got your educational background in, remind me again, it's an environmental degree, right? What specifically is your?
Yeah. Yeah, I have my bachelor's in natural resources with a minor in biology. Mhm.
Okay.
And then, yeah, I went back to school at the technical school up here and have a year and a half technical diploma in marine mechanics.
Oh, I forgot about that. So
Yeah.
that's really, I,
And then now I'm
yeah,
also,
go ahead.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
you were
and so then
saying
I'm
you also,
also doing sail repair right now. So I do so
oh, right.
yeah. So I do
Yeah.
that as well. So a pretty diverse range of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of different skills that you can bring to the table in the industry. That's really cool. What would you say as far as, so
Mhm.
you've got the background in the marine mechanics, you've got the background in taking people out sailing and doing, like you were saying, the sightseeing, and then with the sail repair. Um, is there something, I mean, do you, and then thinking about the educational side too that you mentioned. So do you, can you see yourself kind of in a teaching role in that capacity somewhere? I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think of, like I had mentioned to you that ocean research project,
Mhm.
where they are taking, I think it's a 72-foot schooner up in the high latitudes to do scientific
Mhm.
research and things of that nature. And there's a big research component of that. So are you thinking that maybe you would want to get into some of the research, or with the education maybe stay more in kind of where you're maybe being a teacher of sorts, to bring along the next generation, so to speak?
Yeah, so absolutely. So like in my undergrad, I was kind of studying to be a scientist the whole time, and kind of in my like late junior, early senior year, I realized that I didn't want to be a scientist. And that kind of was like, okay, if I'm not going to do that, what am I going to do? And I still like literally love and appreciate science and the natural world, and love being on the water. And so that sea change expeditions thing that I did kind of showed me that I could continue to do like science in some way. So we did some citizen science stuff there, and also just getting people out on the water. And so that kind of really opened my eyes to like seeing how people react to being on the water. A lot of people who come on my sailboats in the summer are there for the first time. They've never been on a sailboat. Some of them have never been on a boat before. And just watching people's faces kind of like relax when we turn the engine off and it's just the sails and it's quiet and it's peaceful and it's beautiful. And just like seeing people experience that for the first time is pretty powerful. And then being able to like share the natural history of the area and the social history of the area, just to get them like a deeper appreciation for the lake and the Apostle Islands and the Bayfield area, is like really what makes me keep coming back, because I think it is so important that we do enjoy spending time on the water, but we can also think a little bit deeper about it while we're
Yeah.
out there. So being somewhere in some kind of role where I can continue to do that. And like I said, I don't want to be the one doing the science, but I would love to be helping people do science, and like given my
Right.
skills, I am well set up to like be a captain of a research vessel one day where I can help people get to remote places to do research that needs to be
Yeah,
done.
totally.
And also taking everyday people out. Like up here in the Apostle Islands are so inaccessible for most of the people who live in this area, which is really unfortunate. And so working in a way that I can make it more accessible to people as well. So the company I work for, we have like apprenticeship programs where local people can sign up to sail with us and learn how to sail and get out on the water for free, and just like be a deckhand for us. And yeah, I just love being able to be a part of that and would like to do more of that as well. So yeah,
Yeah, that's
kind
really
of a
cool.
long
I had,
answer.
yeah, no, it's great. I had forgotten about that apprentice program that you guys have there. Having the chance to be able to go out in the water with you, and I just felt like a sponge, trying to soak up as
Mm-hmm.
much knowledge as I could, because there is really so much to know, especially when you're in a body of water like Lake Superior, because you know people sometimes will poo-poo and say, "Oh, it's just a lake," but what they don't understand. In fact, one lady I met in Cornucopia at Siskiwit Bay Marina, I met a sailor there, and she said, "Don't be fooled." She said, "This lake." She said, "We actually call them the apocalyptic islands instead of the apostle island, because
Oh, that's funny.
yeah, it's just like she said, if you can sail on Lake Superior, you could sail anywhere in the world, because it can
Mm-hmm.
just be that crazy, and the sea conditions. And I do say sea because I know Lake Superior, I came to learn it. It is referred to as the inland sea, which I think is really,
Mm-hmm.
it really sums it up, because even though it's a freshwater lake, it really is, just as dangerous as if you were out on an ocean. I mean, everybody
Absolutely.
every body of water can be dangerous in some respect, but especially a body of water like that. So
Mm-hmm.
I was curious. I wanted to sort of shift a little bit into you being a woman and being a captain, and your experience, how that has been. Like, for example, I have read a lot of books about female captains, and these people are all older than you are. And so a lot of their experiences from back in the day is that oftentimes, people didn't really believe them that they were the captain of their boat, or that they were sort of treated a little differently than if they had been a man. And so I'm curious, with
Mm-hmm.
you being a young woman and uh, out in the field so that you said this was your first season having your captain's license, is that right? This summer?
Correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious,
Mm-hmm.
how do you feel as a woman and being a young woman? How do you feel that you were received, especially how about like with passengers, when you would take them out cruising? Would they be like, "Who is this young thing? What does she know?" I mean, what did you feel like people would be that way a little bit? Or, I mean, I'm just
Totally.
curious, because I know when I was a younger woman in my field that oftentimes people just didn't really take me seriously, and they didn't give me, they didn't really think I knew what I was doing. And it was all because I was a young woman. So I'm just curious what your
Mm-hmm.
experience has been like.
Yeah. So this summer, being a captain, I actually felt like I had a lot of respect from the vast majority of my passengers. I think there's only one person early on in the season who made a comment about like women drivers at some point. But other than that, everyone was incredibly respectful, I think. And yeah, I also was a mechanic at a marina in Bayfield for a summer, and definitely like had a lot of people look at me kind of weird when I tell them that I'm the mechanic, not this somebody hanging out on the docks, but I'm here to look at their boat. And had a lot of men be rather surprised by that. But for the most part, I think what's really great is the women I get to interact with and the young people that come on my boats, the kids, because it's always is fun to see like somebody you maybe don't expect in a role. And so I had a lot of women be like, wow, I think it's so cool that you do this. And like that means so much to me. Means a lot more to me than like the men that make maybe negative comments towards me. So it just feels good to be in that role for people. And especially felt a lot of that as a mechanic last summer. Like I had some women boat owners who were just like so thankful to have somebody who looked more like them helping them out
Yeah.
and being able to teach them in a way that they don't feel like they're being talked down to. And so that felt really good to be able to provide that for people too. Yeah, and I am lucky to have really great bosses as well. So they have about 50-50 right now, male and female captains, which is great too. Um, but it definitely is still a very male dominated field.
I wonder if you could, and I don't know if there's something like this in the area where you are, the maritime community. Is there sort of a female mentor program for women that are in the maritime field? Like, um, I don't know, I don't want to say a club or anything or a Facebook page or something, but is there like a group of women that are in that area that are kind of like, you know, people that you could go to, or actually you could be one of those women yourself, right? And helping other women coming along to kind of say, hey, I know how that goes, but here's some, I don't know if I want to say advice, but, here's some strategies or tips that, is there anything like
Mm-hmm.
that up there? Like where there's a women oriented support group, I guess is kind of what I want to say for those in the women in the maritime field.
Yeah, not that I know of. I am lucky enough to have several women friends who are also in the sailing field. I have like 4 or 5 friends who are sailors as well. So I feel really lucky to have them, and we definitely like talk about stuff, but not in any sort of formal way. And it's funny you mentioned Facebook groups because I am in a Facebook group for like women who sail and stuff, and there's often like commiserating over sexist comments or like just asking for advice too about certain things. A lot of new sailors are on that, and just like asking like anybody have ideas to how to store my forks or something like that. And it's like very basic stuff to like very more emotionally charged things as well. And so that's like a nice space for people to look for advice and to just have empathy for each other as well. Yeah, so but other than that, there's nothing formal that I'm a part of. Mm-mm. That'd be great. Yeah, I think the ferry line up here especially has a lot of female captains and females working for them, which is great too.
And I'm not on that Facebook, but it sounds like it's probably more for people who are like captains and people who are really in the industry working, right? It's not just for female sailors, or is it for?
No, yeah. So it's mainly for just like cruisers. It's a lot of people who are very new to sailing. Like, hey, I'm thinking about buying this boat. Anybody have thoughts on it? To like people
Oh,
who have been living on sailboats for decades. It's very open, which is I think is great about it because we definitely need that like intergenerational sailing people to help teach us
yeah,
things. Yeah. I was gonna say, my I had some like definitely some female mentors, but just because the industry is so male dominated, definitely had a lot of really incredible male mentors that
yeah,
helped me be where I am today. It's like my dad for one, he always says that I'm like living his dream, and Mark Gordon and Katya Gordon are the people who run Sea Change Expeditions, which I've mentioned multiple times, and their support is like has been one of the most impactful things for me for like wanting to pursue this, both of them. So just like having anybody who can be like, yeah, I believe in you is just so important. Yeah, despite all the other stuff out there.
Oh yeah, for sure. I just think that because I think of my teaching background, it's something that I've always wanted to be able to help other people who might have uh, hesitations about getting into sailing, because it can be, I think, I guess I want to use the word overwhelming in some ways, because like you were saying earlier when we were talking about pontoon boats versus sailboats, it's like there are a lot of
Mhm.
lines. There is like a industry specific vocabulary that is helpful to know. And I would say it's imperative to know personally, because people will say, well, why can't I just say left and right instead of port and starboard? I'm like, well, because if you're out in the water and you say left or right, that can be, whatever way you're facing, right? So when you look back kind of on how you've gotten to where you are now, can you think back to things that sort of were intimidating to you initially? Like, was the docking intimidating, or any other aspect, anchoring or navigation?
Mhm.
There's so many things that I feel like that scares me, that scares me, that scares me. That sort of thing. But it keeps me coming back to want to learn more. So for you, being so experienced, I'm curious, like, what were some of those things for you?
Yeah, I think it's yeah, about the language thing you're talking about with all the vocabulary, it's definitely can be a little, like, frustrating, like you're mentioning, like, why can't we just call it the left and right side? But it is, like, so important to know that language because, like, in a situation where you need to communicate quickly and effectively, if you're not using those terminologies, people might misunderstand you. And also it like makes you sound more like you know what you're talking about, which is also important. Like being a woman, if we're saying like, oh, the left side, or like the line, the green line, the lifts the sail, like, oh, it's a halyard, like we should use halyard. Because it just like it gives you more credibility as well. That you're familiar with your boat and all that. But yeah, and sort of like other things that were intimidating. Docking was definitely something I would had so much anxiety about for like the first 2 months of working this season. Um, and it just like took me bumping into the dock a couple times or like coming in really poorly and having to go back out and do it again. And just like knowing that it's like never gonna be drastically bad. Um, that it's like if we put a little scratch in the boat, that's okay. We can buff it out and it'll be fine. And now I know that if I come in like at that angle, things in this kind of wind, it's not going to end up okay. Um, but ultimately, it's just like doing it over and over and over again until you feel comfortable. And it like literally took me 2 months to be comfortable docking those boats. And even now, I get a little nervous if it's super windy or something, but like it's all gonna be okay in the end. Like they say, you should only approach the dock as fast as you want to hit it. So I usually come in
Yeah.
very slow,
Yeah.
sometimes too slow. Yeah,
Yeah. No,
another
it's
thing that was really intimidating. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
go. No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I also was a little bit overconfident at the beginning of the season with weather conditions, and that was something I had to learn over and over again this summer. It was like when to reef the sails, when to make the sails smaller so you can continue to control the boat. And so that was something that I didn't think that I needed to learn, but I did learn that lesson. And I'm very thankful that I did. And yeah, I feel like I'm constant every time I go out in the water, I'm learning something new about how the boat moves or how the sails adjustment fits to different types of wind and also just like learning about people, when people come on board and how they learn. And back to the vocabulary thing, I often find myself using the terminology a little bit less when I bring people out in the water, just because most of the people who come out have never been sailing before. So if I say halyard, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so I do use more everyday language for that, just to like to make it more accessible, because like I said before, if I'm not using the language, I maybe lose credibility, but it also makes it more inaccessible for people who don't know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And I think that sometimes when people come on board, like I think we went out maybe 7 times with you guys this season. I think it was I think it was 7 different sales that we did. And so that gave me the opportunity to kind of observe some of the other passengers and how they reacted to different situations. And I really feel like when I sailed with you, you were excellent about helping people get that comfort level. And it's like you kind of, probably because especially you've seen it so many times, you know, kind of how to help people um, get comfortable when the boat starts to heel, or like you were saying, like, okay, maybe you know, when we first introduce ourselves that, you know, 5 out of 6 people have never been on a sailboat before, so maybe if it's 15 knots, blowing 15 knots, maybe we'll put that reef in so that the boat's a bit more comfortable and
Mm-hmm.
won't be so scary with them, because a lot of people do get freaked out about that. I would be
Mm-hmm.
curious to know if you wouldn't mind sharing, have you ever, because I always love to hear how people have these situations come up and how they end up resolving them, because I think they're really important opportunities for learning. Getting back to what you said about the weather conditions and being overconfident, it made me wonder, was there a specific situation that you were out on the water with passengers that something happened that made you think, oh, that's not going to happen again? Or yeah, and I was wondering if you would be willing to sort of tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, I've had many humbling moments this summer. One of which, that I like even now I look back on, I'm like, wow, I can't believe I did that. This was like the first camp trip I led this summer with, I had 6 12-year-old girls on my boat and an 18-year-old camp counselor. I was lucky that the camp counselor had sailing experience, so not nearly as much experience as I have, but she could sail the boat if she needed to. And so the first day we went out, it was blowing out of the northeast, which is the farthest. So when the weather comes out of the northeast on Lake Superior, we usually get some pretty good waves, and it's really hard to get anywhere in the islands because Bayfield is southwest of all the islands. So in order to get where we were going pretty much directly upwind, had to tack our way up, and the waves were like 3 feet out there. And so I decided we're gonna reef the jib, reef the main, start off with just a little bit of sail. But I had never reefed that boat before, and I did it incorrectly. So when we pulled up the main, I ended up pulling up the entire mainsail, and I was like, okay, not really what I intended to do, but we'll sail with that, see what happens, and if it's gets too gnarly, I'll just pull in the jib and that'll be fine. And so then I had the jib reefed, just a little bit of the sail out, and we were going upwind, and it was really fun, honestly, the sail. We were super heeled over. The girls were having a great time. It's pretty wavy, but and then there came a point where I was adjusting the sheet on the jib sail, the front sail, so I was pulling it in a little bit, and the rolling furling system broke, and so I only had a little bit of the sail out, and suddenly had the entire sail out, and it was flapping like crazy. And I tried to pull it back in with the rolling furling line, and the rolling furling line did absolutely nothing. It just all came back into my hands, and the sail was out. So then we had both of the sails fully out and like 20 knots of wind, 3 foot waves going upwind. And it got to the point where I was like, okay, we have to sail this boat to somewhere where I can pull the sails down and figure out what's going on with the jib. So we just kept going upwind for a while, making our way towards Stockton Island. And after like a couple hours, the girls were like kind of getting seasick, and everyone was either like asleep or looking kind of miserable. And it was just me and the camp counselor, who were still like pretty awake and active with the sailing training and stuff. And we decided that the only thing I could really do was pull the jib down, which is something that a lot of race boats do, but most cruising boats have rolling furling systems, so those sails just roll up, super simple. So in order to pull the sail down, that meant I had to go onto the bow of the boat while it was raining, while there was waves crashing over the bow. And that was the most scared I've ever been on a sailboat. So we turned the engine on, had the counselor at the helm, and we turned upwind, and the sail's flapping like crazy, and there's lines flying around everywhere. And yeah, I just had to pull the sail down and lower the halyard as I'm doing it, trying not to get wrapped up in any lines. And there's definitely some moments where I thought I was going to fall overboard. And in those kind of conditions, I probably would not have survived. And the people on board would not have been able to rescue me. So that was extremely humbling. But I was able to get the sail down and tied it very crappily to the deck and did the same thing to the mainsail and turned the engine on. And I came back to and then we motored back to Stockton Island. And I came back to the cockpit after pulling the sails down, and one of the campers had woken up, and she was like, "Brandi, I thought you were going to fall overboard there." And I was like, yeah, I did too. But, we're good. And
Oh
just
my
like
gosh.
trying to make sure the girls like felt safe, because like I in those moments didn't feel safe, but I wanted them to feel safe because they would have been fine. But
Yeah.
so that was like the humbling system, and like the rolling furling system. There's nothing I could have done about that to prevent it from breaking.
Yeah.
And but with the mainsail, I should have probably taken a moment to like figure out the reefing system before we pulled out the jib. um
Uh-huh. Wow,
mhm.
that would be super frightening. So it's funny that you mentioned like if you fell overboard. I'm so glad you didn't, by the way. That would have
Yeah,
been
me too.
awful. As some understatement, it would have been awful. It would have been a disaster.
Mhm.
But I'm just thinking. So even when we went out together,
Mhm.
and there was, I think most of the people that we sailed with when we were out with you this season, I don't think, and we went out 3 times together, so that was really cool.
Mhm.
By the way, I loved it.
Yeah.
I don't know that many of the people that we sailed with had sailing experience aside from me and Ben. But I do think of things like, what if something happens to the captain? I know that sounds terrible to say that, but it's true. Like I do think that way. I'm like, there's the captain, and then in certain situations, you guys did also have, I think, one of the apprentices maybe that you mentioned before, um,
Mhm.
that there was like the first mate sort of a thing. So I feel like in some ways I like being able to have some knowledge, obviously, that I would know what to do. Like if, for example, God forbid, you got hit by the boom and something it injured you and you weren't able to still stay at the helm for some reason, would we know what to do? We know how to radio for help. But at any rate, so like for running a business like that, I mean, you have these people's lives in your hands. How do you guys as captains sort of weigh that responsibility on your shoulders? I mean, is it something that keeps you up at night ever? Or do you just, I mean, because you've got to have a lot of confidence to do that.
Yeah.
After one season
Um,
under your belt, like, how do you feel about that aspect of doing what you do?
yeah, so that's definitely something that kept me awake at night for like the first couple months of doing it. And that was like something I talked to my employers about. Like, oh, last night I had this dream where like this thing happened on the boat and somebody got hurt. And it's very real. Accidents happen. I had a friend this spring who lost a finger in a boating accident, and I had some moments on board where the summer where I was like, if that incident happened just like slightly differently, it could have been very bad. And it's scary to think about that, and I continue to learn so much. Yeah, like safety is always my number one priority.
How about we finish up or wrap up with something that was an amazing experience you had this season out in the water, something that just made it all worth the while, that you were like, this is the reason why I do this?
Hmm. Yeah, I think yeah, just I mentioned this earlier, but that moment where we turn the engine off and it's just the sound of the water and the sails, and people just get this look on their face like, wow, this is it. Like, this is amazing. And so many people are like, wow, this is, I get why people do this. Maybe we should get a sailboat. And that always just brings me so much joy. I'm like, yeah, this is pretty amazing. And just be able to take a step away from our fast-paced society, and just to appreciate what's around us and what's here in this moment, I think is just my favorite part. And luckily I experience that almost every day when I'm out there. Yeah.
That's
Mm-hmm.
really cool. Well, I think that we can wrap up with that. I would love to talk with you again another time and maybe get into some more other questions that I have. But I just want you to know how grateful I am for the
Mm-hmm.
time that you've given. You sharing your time with us and with me is an amazing gift.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Okay, you take care.
Thank you too.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode featuring Captain Brandi. If you are getting something out of my podcast series, please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel and stop by for a visit on my website at passagesfromtheheart.wordpress.com. Until next time, fair wind.